My name is Joel Hopkins, and this is my wife, Gia. We started Bread for Life of America in 2009. We was pastoring a church in Charlotte, and the Holy Spirit spoke to us about getting out the four walls of the church and just started working with people just in the community. And so we thought it would be a great idea to go back to where we actually grew up from. I'm from the Bun-Zebulon area, and I want to do something that's be meaningful and impactful to people.
So that's where we started just going in the neighborhoods and just asking them, meeting the neighbors, do you have anything in your pantry that you can just donate to our Bread for Life, our nonprofit? If you have anything that you're just not going to use, can you just give it to us?
And then we got a partnership with Interfaith Food Shuttle and Feed America. They heard about our story, and then they started giving us the food for free. And so we start giving the food back to people for free. So we serve anywhere between 300 to 400 families every third Saturdays in this area right here. So we have to go to the state fairgrounds where Interfaith Shuttle is and get the truck. We take the truck and drive down 264 to Zebulon. While they're doing that, while that's going on, we have Gia and her mom and other relievers are there. They're setting up tables and boxes and stuff. Truck pulls up. Everybody go crazy. You know, they be so pumped and excited. We line up the cars. We don't have the people get the cars. We line the cars up. And then after we pray, we give God praise and glory. We in the middle of the parking lot. We fired up, we ready to go. Yeah. And we start going. And we just start serving the food, putting the food in people's cars, and they move out and moving boxes. We got some people that's actually putting the trash in the dumpster while we're doing all at the same time. And we can get it done within like an hour and a half, we done. We're probably the biggest mobile market in Wake County. We call the people that are hidden, the people that you wouldn't think that need that need the box of food. It's just, we're not talking about just street people. We're not talking about that. We're talking about average working people that works every day. And they tell us that, hey, if we didn't receive this box of food, we would have made it to the end of the month. God has told us to do this. And so you gotta think, for 15 years later now, we've served over 700,000 families.
We all go through things, right? We don't know what each other goes through, but really understanding that you really have a gift that was given to you from Christ to say, hey, how can I help you today? Sometimes you don't even have to ask that. It's the action. It could be a smile. It could be a high five. It could be a hug. It can be a box of food. It could be a listening ear. So we really understand like that free, powerful gift of serving is what really, really changes people's lives.
The Lord has blessed us tremendously, and I just want to be able to serve. I don't want my crown here on earth. I want it when I see Jesus. I want him to say, good and well done, my faithful servant.
What a cool story. Just to see the goodness of God and how he works in the lives of people who surrender their life to him and serve him. So by the way, thank you. You saw on that video a few frozen turkeys getting put in the back of a vehicle, and that's from you. That's from the generosity of this family who gave. And normally when, I think yesterday there were more than a couple hundred families that were served, and almost 500 people. And normally they don't get meat, so it's just vegetables and fruits and breads and that kind of stuff. And yesterday we were able to supply turkey from 7 Marks, and so thank you. Thanks for doing that. It was fun. And whenever you are around Joel and Gia, whether it's just like a hug in the lobby, or if it's serving alongside of them, or even I've had breakfast with Joel, like one of the things that just kind of spills out from them is joy. Like they are just so joyful. And I don't know about you, but I need that. Like I need people like that around me that kind of spur me on and inspire me to more. They're good for me. They're good for the church because we need people like that. But one of the things that stood out to me on that video was, in addition to their joy, was the last few lines of what Joel said. And now think about it. For 15 years, every single month, rain or shine, cold, hot, doesn't matter, they organize for and then show up to distribute food to families in need. And they don't get paid for it. Most of the people that they serve and that are rolling through there, they identify them by face, but they don't even know their name. And I know for a fact that they have given of their resources and for sure of their time. But I love what he said. It's not really for the crown now. He said, it's so when I see my Father in heaven, he says to us, well done, thou good and faithful servant. It's like for both of them, their joy, their life, their service is fueled by a vision that just transcends the moment, the current moment. Whether it's easy some weeks or hard some weeks, something is spurring them on. In fact, that's crucial for where we've been over the last 5 weeks in this series talking about relationships. So if you're new to 7 Marks, or you haven't been in a while, or you've missed some weeks, we are deep into our Christmas series entitled Family Tree. And so it's a little bit unique series for Christmas, but when the communicator team got together and we started talking about, hey, what is our Christmas series going to be? Immediately thinking about some of the challenges and needs of our church family, and then also what's elevated at this time of year is family. It's being around family and being around people that you love, and but then also with that is the challenge of being around family and being around people, and the challenge of being human, which is getting along with other human beings, right? So then we said, okay, well, let's do a series on Jesus' family lineage, like his family tree, and see if we can learn some lessons from that. Because Jesus' family tree is not a lot different than ours. For all of history, people have been challenged with how to get along with people. So when you look at Jesus' family tree, you see some really cool stuff, some individuals and relationships where we can look to for great examples, but then we also see like straight up train wrecks in Jesus' family line. Like we see all the things that we all struggle with, like hate and jealousy and pride that bubbles up. We also see in his family line that there's sexual sin in his family line. Then we also see murder and people that are backbiting and lie. Like we see all the idolatry and all of the things that we see in our relationships, we see in Jesus' earthly family line. But then we also see woven into all of that this really patient, gracious, redemptive love of God. It just in every relationship, in every individual in this family tree. And so that's important for us because, look, we all make messes of our relationships at one point or another. No one is perfect in here. And no one in here has perfect relationships. At some point or another, since we're all imperfect, the bristles of our life come against somebody else, and they see some of the imperfectness in us, and we see some of the imperfectness in them, and then we are challenged with, okay, how do we navigate through this? And then you have some relationships at times where it's going one direction. And you have a vision for what this is supposed to look like in the future. But then something happens. And what you thought and where you thought this was going ends up not going there. And then it derails your life a little bit, and you find yourself struggling through this relationship because it's not what you thought it was going to be, or you didn't think, it's not what you thought it was. And so what do you do in those situations where it seems like, man, this relationship, this just blew up? What do I do now? Where do I go now? And so that's what we're going to talk about today, and we're going to use a story in the Old Testament that many of you are familiar with, especially if you've been in Sunday school as a kid in church, or maybe you went to vacation Bible school during the summertime. And it's the story of Joseph. So not Joseph and Mary and baby Jesus. We'll get to that in a couple days at our Christmas Eve gathering. But we're going to talk about Joseph of the Old Testament. So many of you know the guy with the coat of many colors, right? You would have learned as a kid. Or the great-grandson of Abraham, the patriarch of the Jewish people. And so what we're going to see with Joseph is somehow, he had this vision that transcended the current moment, whether good or bad, that seemed to fuel him making it in life. But not just making it, like prospering in life. And so we're going to start where we have for the past few weeks in Matthew, the first few verses of the Gospel of Matthew, the first book in the New Testament, but then we're going to flip right back to the first book of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis. So Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, it says this: "This is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, Isaac the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers." Isn't that interesting? Kind of unusual for a genealogy where Matthew has added some important context surrounding Judah, as if to say, hey, listen, we can't talk about Judah unless we talk about his brothers. And the brothers that Matthew is referring to are 12 in number. They are the 12 sons of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel by God. And so these 12 brothers or sons would end up becoming the 12 tribes of Israel. And while only one brother is mentioned in this genealogy, in the lineage of Jesus, all the brothers were important in the people of God, especially the one we're going to talk about today, whose name was Joseph. Now, before I go any further, this is kind of like a side note that I think might be important I know it's important for me, and it might be important for somebody in this room. Like in a day and age where we feel like in order to be significant, we have to try and make a name for ourselves. Or we have to try and do something that people will notice. Or we have to have a certain position of leadership in order for us to feel significant. But isn't it interesting when you look in this genealogy that Joseph's name is never mentioned? He simply is one of Judah's brothers. See, as a follower of Jesus, our significance is not in the name we try and make, or the position that we hold, or some big accomplishment. Our significance is found in Jesus. That's where it's found. And so we see in this that Joseph, his name's not mentioned, he comes to play a really significant role in the continuation of the family line of Jesus. So Joseph, many of you know about him, he was his dad's favorite. I'm sure his brothers loved that. His dad made him a coat. He didn't make a coat for any of the other brothers. He just made one for Joseph. Again, I'm sure his brothers loved seeing Joseph in his coat, parading around in his coat. In fact, they hated him. They were jealous of him. And we know on one occasion that Joseph gave a bad report to his dad about his brothers. So we all like siblings who are tattletales, right? So that's what was happening here. So to make himself look better in the eyes of his dad than his brothers. But what we also see is that the story didn't seem to escalate in this area of hate and anger and jealousy until Joseph told his brothers on 2 occasions, and his father on one, about a dream he had where they would all bow down to him. And so just imagine for a minute you have a brother or you have somebody in your family or maybe a close friend, and they come to you and they say, hey, listen, man, like I know you have like aspirations for your life. I know that you have a vision for your life. And you probably have mapped out some of your goals, like your 1-year goal, your 3-year goal, your 10-year goal, like that. That's all awesome. I think you should do all that. But somewhere in your planning, you might want to know and make note of that at some point you're going to bow down to me. So from our perspective, in any circumstance, that's just arrogant. That's rude. Like it's uncalled for. Even if you think it, even if you've dreamt it, like you probably want to keep that to yourself, especially with people that hate you. But of course, Joseph didn't do that. Maybe he was excited about it. I don't know. But the end result of him telling his brothers about that and that exchange would end up leading him to wanting to be killed by his brothers. So one day he's going out into the field to check on his brothers. His brothers see him coming and they're like, hey, let's kill him. They don't kill him because of Reuben, one of the brothers, like, hey, let's not kill him. So they throw him in a cistern to die. And so while they are eating their lunch and Joseph is begging, hey, please let me out of this cistern, this caravan of Ishmaelites come along and they say, hey, let's get something for our brother. Let's sell him to them, which they do, and then they take Joseph into Egypt as a slave. Meanwhile, the brothers go back to their dad with this coat that they have stripped from Joseph. They dipped it in blood from an animal, and they lie to their dad. They lead their dad to believe that Joseph is now dead. And of course, their dad mourns that. But from the brother's perspective, it's like, see you later, dreamer. Like, let's see what will become of your dream now. The death of a dream. Now, I just want us for a second just to sit with that and put yourself in the shoes of Joseph. Now, I'm not sure about you. I don't know how long it would take me to get over that, if ever. I mean, think about it. I'm just being honest. The trauma of being manhandled by my brothers, where they strip me of my clothes and throw me into a cistern, and then they don't listen to my cries for help, and then they sell me as a slave. I'm betrayed by them, and then they consider me now as no longer existing on the planet. I don't know how that doesn't spill out into the rest of your life and into the relationships that are around you. Blaming others for the spot that you are currently in, we're good at that. We're for sure withdrawing. We become cynical, maybe skeptical, slow to trust. It would impact everything. We are for sure going to be really slow to give our heart to anyone or anything. Maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe that's where you are right now in a relationship that you're in. Now, what they've done and how they've treated you has been nothing but hateful, dishonest, unfair, unwarranted. Again, it could be your spouse, it could be a child, it could be a coworker in a work relationship, it could be a friend that betrayed. It could be any different relationship in the different spheres that you operate in. But here you are. You're in it. You're in it right now. And it has impacted your relationship with them, but it's also impacted your relationship with others, with God. It's even impacted how you are viewing yourself, how you are looking at yourself. Because after all, it has messed up your picture of what you thought this relationship was going to be, where you thought you were going to be in the future. It's messed it all up. And so now you're trying to figure out, what do I do now? Like last week, Josh talked about forgiveness. And so you would say to me, well, Paul, yeah, that's me. I've forgiven this person, but maybe you have found yourself having a hard time walking out this forgiveness every day of your life. That no doubt could have been Joseph's story. And we wouldn't have blamed him at all for that. But it wasn't. It wasn't. So we're going to pick up the story, Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. So at this point, Joseph, he was taken out of the pit, sold to these Ishmaelites into slavery, and now he is in Egypt, and this is what we read. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt. Potiphar, an Egyptian, who was one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him there. And the Lord was with Joseph. So let me stop there just for a second. First off, if this is where you are, where I just described, you are in a really tough, difficult spot in a relationship. And you didn't see yourself getting there, but you're there. Let me just tell you this. God is there. He's there. He is with you. He has not left you. He has not forsaken you. In fact, you need to know this. Before you got to where you find yourself right now, He was already there before you got there. He knows exactly what's going on in your world. And as I said in the first week of this series, God cannot love you any more than He loves you right now. Doesn't matter what's going on, doesn't matter what you've done. God cannot love you any more than He loves you in this very moment. What is happening in your life right now? God has a plan that transcends all of that. So we see here that he prospered and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. And when his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and of all that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field. So Potiphar left everything he had in Joseph's care. with Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except the food that he ate. And so while we read that the Lord was with him in everything that he did and he prospered, I don't want you to miss what was written in between the lines here. That he was a trusted servant. You could even put an employee here. He was a trusted servant. He was dependable. And he was conscientious about what he did. He turned the head of his master by the way he served and how he was blessed as a result. What you don't see in the text is someone who is allowing his very recent past and the hurt that was incurred and the pain to alter who he was and how he carried himself. There was no sign, at least there was no sign of bitterness here. Or there was no sign of him having this chip on his shoulder or this woe is me victim mentality. I just said, if that was me, if that was us, I'm like, this is horrible. Like, I am a slave in a foreign country. How bad is this going to get? Like, if God is for me, if God loves me, then, like, what's the deal? How did I get here? Is God really paying attention to what's going on in my life? Why would he allow this? And then we would pout, continue to pout, and settle into this victim mindset, telling anybody who would listen how bad we have it right now. Look, I don't know the timeline of Joseph and how he was able to get out of his head. And I'm not saying that after life or after a relationship deals you a gut punch. I'm not saying that you don't need time to recover and to heal. You do. And you need people around you that will help you heal and recover. And most times, it's important you get a professional that will help you with the serious gut punches of life. But for Joseph, again, I don't know what the timeline is. What had happened to him with his brothers and where he now found himself seemed to be overshadowed by something else, something greater within Joseph. Look, he could have played the past, and he probably did. He play it over and over and over again, hundreds of times, thousands of times, but it would not change it. It couldn't change it. Instead, somehow he's able to lift his head up and trust in the sovereign work of God and what was going on. And then serve faithfully in the capacity that he saw himself in the moment. And he did that from this secure place inside of him where he feared the Lord. He discovered in that moment, whenever that moment was, like I can either trust in God, I can either surrender to God and what's happening right now, what he's allowing in my life, or I can play out the victim here. And Joseph chose the former. And I would just add, that's one of the quickest ways for us to practically escape this victim mentality or mindset, to recover from the hurt in our relationships, and that is to shift our focus from our pain to where God has us in the moment and who we could give ourselves to and serve and help. So I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask it in a little while again. Who is around you? Where has God put you right now? Who is around you that he wants you to love and to serve. Can you see him? Or are you lost in yourself? Look, I'm not minimizing the hurt that relationships can bring. Believe me, I'm not. Or maybe even in your current situation. I'm just saying that there is a bigger story going on in your life right now that transcends the current moment. And it's not just for those that on this extreme maybe that are really going through a hard time in a relationship. It could be all the way over here on this other extreme where right now you're living your best life. Like everything in your life right now is absolutely, it's the best version of your life up to this point. Like it's awesome. But I would say to you, like be careful not to fall into the trap that it is all about you. Because at either extreme, you could fall into being absorbed with yourself. And we see Joseph, he was in both extremes, and we'll watch how he handles them. But as the story continues, and we don't have time to get into, I wish we had time just to keep walking through this whole story. But I would invite you to read this later on. But as the story continues, so Joseph is in Potiphar's house, and Potiphar's wife keeps making advances at him. But Joseph keeps denying that. And one time he gets stuck in the house with her, and nobody else is around, and he escapes, but she has his cloak. And so then she falsely accuses him for making advances on her. And so Potiphar throws Joseph into prison. And so just time out. So now he went from being betrayed by his family, sold into slavery, now falsely accused, and in prison in a land that's not his home. But the same thing happens again, all over again. The prison warden sees that something is different about this dude. And he entrusts the rest of the prisoners to Joseph. And doesn't concern himself with anything as long as Joseph was in charge. And so as the story continues, Pharaoh, the leader of the land, has a couple servants. He throws them into prison, and they both have dreams. And then Joseph interprets their dreams. And 2 years later, after he interprets the dreams, he says to the one, hey, when you get out, hey, make sure you remember me. He doesn't. 2 years later, he's like, oh, the Pharaoh was having a dream. And so he's, I remember this guy in prison. Yeah, like he told me my dream and it came true. So Pharaoh calls Joseph out of prison. And Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream, that there's going to be 7 years of plenty in the land and 7 years of famine. And it's going to happen, king, so you got to find somebody that's going to be able to store up in the years of plenty and then be able to distribute. And the Pharaoh's like, well, that's you. I don't know anybody like you that has the Spirit of God in them, so that's got to be you. So Pharaoh makes him second in command of all the land, and he is in charge of storing up all the grain during the years of plenty. And then as the famine started, he began to distribute the food. Well, now, 20 years later, over 20 years, from the time he had his dream to now his brothers are coming to get food so that their family would not die. And they find themselves bowing before their brother, who they do not recognize. And you can read for a little while, it's this kind of cat and mouse game. Joseph's kind of testing them and seeing what they're about, seeing if they've learned anything over the years. But then finally it gets to the point where Joseph discloses who he is to his brothers. And here we read this in Genesis 45. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." At this point, he's already said, I'm Joseph. And they were freaked out. They didn't know what to do. He says, "Come close to me." And when they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph. The one you sold into Egypt. But now watch. And now do not be distressed. And do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God." We have trouble with that right there. All the stuff that happened to me, you guys wanting to kill me and then throwing me in the cistern, and while I was begging to get out, you wouldn't get me out, and then you sold me as a slave. Then the false accusation from Potiphar's wife, and then the dudes in prison not remembering Joseph, and all of that. Yep, all from God. He allowed it. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, "This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me. You, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, all you have. I will provide for you there. Because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute." Again, many of you know this story. You were tracking with me through the story, a feel-good story of the Bible. And while we see the forgiveness of Joseph toward his brothers, and we see the providential hand of God in ordering all of this, I do not want you to miss the attitude and the behavior of Joseph throughout the entire story as a servant. Regardless of who was in front of him and regardless of his circumstances, whether it was his relationship with his father that was really good, or it was the betrayal of his brothers, or Potiphar, or to the prison warden, or the people of Egypt, or the other prisoners, in whatever relationship he was a servant. You could argue that his trust in his Father in heaven moved him from victim to servant. One of my favorite parts of this whole story is in the end, and not just what I read today, but a little bit further, but it's summarized in what he says to his family. And you have to get this. He is in the best possible spot that he's ever been in his entire life. Second in command. Has whatever he wants. And he says this, come here. Come, I will provide for you. I will provide for you. In essence, I will serve you. I will serve you from the role that God has put me in. Uncommon, true servant leadership. See, it was always part of God's design to put Joseph in positions where God could refine his character, while at the same time use Joseph to show others who God was and is by how he carried himself, by how he loved, by how he served. The same could be said about you and I in the relationships that we currently find ourselves in, good or bad. Could it be that you are where you are in the relationships that you are in so that God could refine your character as a follower of Jesus and to demonstrate to those around you the transforming power of the God within you by how you serve and love people around you? God's plan was to put Joseph in a position to serve and to save his family. A family, by the way, that would be included in the family line of Jesus. Merry Christmas. You cannot tell the story of Joseph, you cannot read the story of Joseph and not think of Jesus. This story is the foreshadow of the birth, the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus came. God in the flesh. And he revealed to mankind, to his own, the vision that God had for mankind through him. But the Gospel of John tells us he came to his own, but his own did not receive him. They rejected him. When Jesus came on the scene, he brought an upside down kingdom, a vision of a kingdom that was different and transcended the current moment. He was the ultimate example of what it meant to lay down personal rights and status in order to lift others up. When you start to flip through the Gospels, you would see Jesus washing his disciples' feet and serving the marginalized and healing the sick. He turned heads, not by lording himself over everybody, demanding the allegiance of people, but by serving them. And his disciples didn't quite get how Jesus was leading. We know that because on several instances they're like debating on who's the greatest and who's going to exercise authority next to Jesus. And Jesus responds to them in Mark 10. Look, you guys know that those who are regarded as rulers of the Gentiles, they lord it over them. And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you, though. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. Jesus essentially said, I am not here for me, I am here for you. I am not here to seek a seat of ruling over you, but serving you and saving you from yourself. You have needs, many of which you don't even know. But your greatest need is to be saved from your sin. To be saved from a condition where it makes you look in and make your whole life about you. And then you start chasing things to try and make you happy. But Jesus came to save you from yourself and save you from your sin. His vision for you transcends the here and now. You were called for more. He called you to embrace this life of giving your life away. That's what he did for you, to save you. And he calls you to reflect that to the people around you. And while there could be tons of takeaways for this story, I just want to give you a couple. Number one, serve faithfully from who you are. Serve faithfully from who you are. Now, it's obvious from Joseph's story, when he responds to his brothers, when he reveals himself to them, it's obvious that this dream that he had when he was 17 years old stayed with him throughout his life. Now, whether or not that fueled his attitude, his service to others, I don't know. What I do know, though, is this, that his identity as one who feared the Lord was firmly rooted inside of him, and it ordered how he lived. So let me ask you this question. Where you are right now in the relationships that you're in, the situations you find yourself in, is your life rooted in Jesus? So that no matter what, good or bad, easy or challenging, you are able to step out firmly planted in who you are as Jesus. In the letter to the church in Galatia, the Apostle Paul wrote to people like me and you, he said this, "You, my brothers and sisters, you were called to be free, but do not use your freedom to indulge the flesh. Rather, serve one another humbly in love." If you are a follower of Jesus today, you are his. You're his. You're his representative. You're his ambassador. You're his servant. You're not your own. You are not a victim. You have been bought with a price if you're a follower of Jesus. You are a called out one that has been invited into this new and living way. And so my prayer for you, if you're a follower of Jesus and you call 7 Marks home, man, my prayer as we move into the new year is that you will pick your head up, and number 2, you will serve faithfully where you are. You serve from who you are, and you serve faithfully where you are. Joseph didn't allow his circumstances to dictate his attitude or activity, whether he was a slave in Potiphar's house or a prisoner in Egypt. He was all in, serving from his whole heart. So today, you and I have been put in multiple spheres of relationships. And so I want to ask you again, who is around you that God is calling you to love and to serve? Can you see them? Or are you consumed with you? And I need to avoid getting on a soapbox here, but men, I am calling you to lead and love your wives, to serve your wives. I'm hearing way too much these days. But I'm calling you as men, from one man to another. Let's love, serve, and lead our wives. Maybe you're wrestling with a sibling. Maybe you're a child and you're wrestling with a parent relationally. Coworker in your work environment. Maybe a neighbor. Whatever it is, who is God calling you to love and serve? And over the past few weeks, we've been pointing you as a response to the Christmas tree that's in the center of the lobby. There are cards on that, and those cards represent people that God has put on your heart over the last 4 or 5 weeks, people that he's calling you to love, that he's calling you to accept, that he's calling you to be patient with, that he's calling you to show kindness to. He's calling you to forgive, and today we add serve. So I'd encourage you when you leave, if God is calling you to something greater that transcends the current moment, to serve, man, stop by the table, write a name, put it on the tree, and walk courageously. He has freed you to live through the power of the Spirit in difficult relationships and tell a different story. and be a different person. So I'm challenging you to be that today, to serve and love those in front of you. Because when you do that, you reflect your Heavenly Father and you bring glory to Him. So let's pray. And with heads bowed and eyes closed, I said you can't read the story or listen to the story of Joseph without being pointed to Jesus, who came into this world to seek and to save those who were lost. Are you lost today? Do you know Jesus? Have you trusted Him with your life, or are you trying to fill your life with everything else? Are you consumed with you? You will never be free. But today, if you would ask Jesus to come and forgive you of your sin, He will give you life, and life that's full, and life that's free. So if you never trusted Jesus, right where you're seated, you could trust Him today. Just simply pray to Him and ask Him to forgive you of your sin, come into your life, and make you new. He'll do it in that very moment. And if you're a follower of Jesus, quick question. Whatever sphere of relationship you're in, who is He calling you to love and to serve? Be bold and do it.